happy 26-year anniversary with me and the CJ-7. To steal a little bit from Doug DeMuro, this is my 1978 CJ-7. Now, I've had this since 1997, and since it's 2023, that's 26 years of ownership. When I first got this, it was a pile of junk. It didn't even have a windshield in it. The fenders on the inside were being held together with cut-up extension cords. The rear fenders in the back would flap on the inside. If my friends and I would go too fast in it with the hard top on, it would violently rock from side to side because there was no bushings left inside of the leaf springs. Was literally a disaster. Front to back, holes in the floorboards like the Flintstones, but it had these big tires. And I love big tires. It just completes the whole look. And that's what drew me in. When I was dealing with suspension system, having all that play in it, I went ahead and I did polyurethane bushings all around, as well as polyurethane everywhere that rubber would have been. Transmission, engine mount, a body, doesn't matter. If it needed a bushing or some sort of rubber replacement, I went with polyurethane because I didn't want to have that degeneration or degradation of the rubber where I would have issues with it down the road, because my intention with this one was to keep it long term. And that's exactly what I've done. It does have the V8. It's got the 304 AMC motor, which is going to be that 5-liter engine. But again, it's 1978. So even though you've got a lot of cubic inches there for a Jeep, it's not going to have a lot of horsepower. Over the years, what I did was I built it back up. I did a few things here and there where I was doing repairs and cleaning it up and stuff like that. But then it got to the point where the little things weren't changing the big things. So what I ended up doing, instead of replacing the windshield frame or putting a welded patch of metal in on the floorboard, after having done those things, what I ended up doing was a complete teardown. We went all the way down to the frame, and I ended up even tossing the frame away and starting from scratch with a donor frame. Luckily, I had a friend at an auto parts store that was able to find a donor for me, and I was able to get a donor frame and a donor tub, and ended up sending those off for sandblasting work. And then after I had everything sandblasted from front to back, then I took it to a guy and had everything painted for me. And I was fortunate enough to have people that were willing to work with me as a young guy in my early 20s and help me out and get things taken care of. We took all those parts back to my garage and put everything back together. That's like a 3-year journey of tearing down, repairing, and building back up and getting it back on the road. But the nice thing was, that was my first time ever doing anything major like that. Prior to that, we're talking spark plugs, oil changes, the basics. But I started with the basic knowledge of screws do two things. They screw in and they screw out. And from there, a restoration was begun. But there's still many things that need to be completed on this. It was one of those things where I was getting ready to go to grad school, and if I wasn't gonna wrap it up, I was gonna move a box of parts, and it was never gonna get finished if I did that. So with that, I finished everything up, got it back on the road, got it running, and I was super ecstatic because we went down to nothing. But there's things that I would like to do. Like, I would like to rebuild the engine. I'm still running on the original engine, and I'm pretty certain it's never been rebuilt. The original transmission, the original transfer case, so on and so forth. So the drivetrain, I would like to eventually pull all that out and completely rebuild it and put it back in there and have it good for another 43 years. 45. For another 45 years. But there's other things that need to happen, and that's going to be later down the road of fixing the drivetrain, not fixing the drivetrain, restoring the drivetrain, but it runs strong and I'm pretty happy with that. So I can't really complain too much when it comes to how well it runs. Now, hopefully I'm not jinxing myself, but yes, it does run well. Got that 304 in there and it definitely fills up the engine bay a lot more than what you would see with the inline 6, but you can also see its age. But it's not terrible, but it's just old and needing to be cleaned up and getting everything back to specs. But other than that, like I said, it's a strong engine that I'm very pleased with. Interior is one of those things where when I was building this, I was on an undergraduate's budget and I was able to find some seats that were in the junkyard that fortunately had quite a few Jeeps in there, so I was able to source a lot of stuff from it. This seat in the back, that's the one that actually came with it, the Levi edition. So I wanted something that would match. When I first got this, it had a fold and tumble seat out of, I believe, a Bronco, and it was coat hangered in place. So definitely not the safest. Some of the upcoming projects that I have for the CJ-7 are going to be rebuilding the carburetor. The carburetor is getting to the point where it needs to be rebuilt again, and that's something that needs to be done. I think the last time I did that was about 8 years ago, so it got a pretty good run out of the rebuild that we did back then. Another thing that I need to have done is I need to get the front bumpers and the rear bumpers on. I'm swapping out from these old tube style that I put back on in 2001, and it's time to retire those and bring out something a little bit better. So I have these worn bumpers for the front and back, which are going to be a thicker gauge metal, a little heavier duty and stuff like that, but they'll also allow me to get my spare tire back on here. After having upgraded from 33s up to 35s, the spare tire would no longer fit on the factory mount hanger. Now, I was pushing the limits of the factory mount hanger before with the 33s, but with the 35s, they're definitely too big on diameter as well as the weight, so it would be really pushing the limits, and I would most likely start seeing some body damage on the back of the tub. One of the other things that I need to do is I need to get lockouts replaced. I was working with some of my previous ones. I have the worn ones, which are an upgrade from the factory, but what happened was I didn't feel like they were fully engaging. I gave it a little extra twist and the plastic ended up breaking. So that's like a faulty thing. The little knob there is a plastic knob, and on the inside it ended up breaking. And when I contacted Warren, it was a matter of, we don't actually replace the part, we just replace the whole thing, which to me, it's probably like a $5 part, but they want to send out all new lockouts, which means that's like a $300 replacement, but they do a lifetime guarantee, so it should be covered from what I understand. As those of you that follow the channel know, not only do I have the 1970 CJ-7, but I also have the 2020 Jeep Gladiator. So you can see the similarities between the two of them and the history that they both share. They made sure to really keep true to how this one looks when they were building out this one. I have them set up very similarly. They're both riding on 35-inch tires. While this one has 15-inch rims, this one has the 20-inch rims with the modern look, but still retaining that old school feel. What you're going to notice is, again, a lot of the same similarities. The wide fenders, the round headlights, the setup on the grille with the same number of slots, the same setup with the roof line, as well as every little detail as it comes down to it, with even where the windshield folds down, how it's going to rest up on there. Everything is very similar, but just with an updated look. The modern one is definitely going to ride a lot smoother and a lot more efficient when it comes to fuel economy. Here I'm going to be getting that 17 to 22. Here I'm looking more at like 8, 10, You know, if I'm lucky, then that's because this has got that old cast iron V8 engine. This has got a much more modern engine inside of it, so it's going to make a huge difference when it comes to its ability to get better gas mileage, its ability to have a smoother ride, its ability to tow better, but overall, modern, old school. And let's be honest, you can't beat the sound of that old school V8 coming from the 1978 CJ-7. You're just not going to get that kind of exhaust note with a modern Jeep. When playing around with the measurements, I noticed that the hardtop on the Gladiator and the hardtop on the CJ-7 have very similar dimensions, but here you're getting a back seat, not really much room behind the back seat except for a small amount of storage. But here you do have the back seat, so you're going to have the leg room in the front as well as the cargo area behind the seat. While small, much bigger than what's going to be in the Gladiator. So again, a lot of similarities when looking at them, which I really do enjoy. What I'd like to finish up with is a happy 26-year anniversary with me and the CJ-7. Even though it's a 1978, it's funny how people will say, wow, I really thought it was a newer Jeep. I didn't realize it was 45 years old. And that's because of the restoration process that it went through, but also because of the fact that it is mostly retired now. I don't do anything crazy with it. I pretty much just bring it out on nice days and I keep it garage kept, which does help preserve it and keep it long lasting. You don't see a lot of CJ-7s out on the road anymore, as well as not in good condition. Now, if I want to go off-roading and do crazy things, I will have something purpose-built to do that. I'll often hear complaints, oh, that's not a real Jeep, or you don't treat it like a real Jeep, or this, that, the other. Well, it's retired. It's been there, it's done that, and now it does what it does now. Until next time, Rob's Garage. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode with my trip down memory lane of the restoration and ownership of the 1978 CJ-7. I like to joke that I've owned it more years than I've not owned it. But if you enjoyed this episode, of course, hit that like button. If you want to see more, definitely subscribe. Leave a comment. Happy to answer them. But again, I thank you and have a great one.